Hello and welcome back. I'm Hiro. In this video we're going to talk about single combat great weapon versus great weapon. First thing I want to discuss is weapon length. So against opponents using 6-foot weapon or less, okay, I should say 6-foot-ish or less, I will try to use as close a weapon as close to their length as possible, because I think that having equal length weapons makes the fight more fun. Against opponents using weapons longer than 6'4" or so, instead of using my longest weapon, which is 6 foot even, I will actually use a shorter weapon. So like I would go with this one instead, and I will discuss why in just a minute. So using range and measure against a similar length weapon. So imagine that my opponent and I have weapons of about this length. Let's just use that as an example. Make sure to start the fight out of measure. Because range and measure are going to be basically the same, you have to think about how to move safely into range without getting hit. So I need to think about how I move into range to hit my opponent without getting hit myself. If the opponent has their weapon out in front of them, like middle guard, then a few options. So that's my preferred situation because it's more predictable. A few options you have: initiating a bind, which we'll discuss a little bit later, using a circular strike like a feint or offensive slap. So we already went over circular strikes in a previous video. If I were to throw a feint, then it would feint like this and then circle around to attack. Or if I wanted to slap their weapon out of the way, I'd probably start in the relaxed low guard, because that gives me the best stick velocity for that slap. So then I would slap their weapon out of the way to attack. So against lapel, if I wanted to feint this way and then move into attack. Or if I wanted to slap their weapon out of the way, slap it and then attack. And so both those cases I'm starting out of range and then moving into range as I attack. Another option is to wait for them to attack you, or possibly goad them into attacking you first, and then counter an attack. We already went over block and counter in a previous video, but just to revisit that real quick, you can do A-frame block to attack, or defensive slap to a circular strike. If the opponent does not have their weapon out in front, say if they're in high guard or low guard, then that's a little bit less predictable. In situations like that, you want to try to attack using something that moves your body off of the opponent's attack lines. So something like pivot step into Zwerchkal, because that moves me way out here where it's harder for my opponent to turn and face me. You can use a feint, like a circular strike or something. So if I'm here, I'm going to do a feint to this side in order to attack, because then my opponent has to react, my opponent is most likely to react to that feint while I'm already moving to a different attack. Another thing you can do is a pop thrust. Throw a pop thrust as I'm moving to attack, because that sets me up better for the next strike. You can also use a sliding spear thrust because it has longer range. So if I'm out here where I can't easily hit my opponent, and they're in, say, high guard or low guard, and they're not protecting themselves with their weapon, and if I throw out a sliding spear thrust, then that has a little bit longer reach. But you also have to be careful, because if they attack into your thrust, it's really easy to knock it offline, and then you're in a bad situation. Again, the option to wait for them to attack, or try to goad them into attacking and then counterattack. Next thing we're going to talk about is using range and measure against a longer weapon. Fiona, can you assist me, please? So if Fiona is using that weapon and I'm using this one, then obviously she's got the reach advantage. So you want to start the fight out of measure, because I don't want her to be able to easily hit me. She's got the reach advantage. I don't want her to be able to easily use that reach advantage against me. So I want to start the fight out of range. When I'm ready to move into measure, go ahead and put your weapon up in front of you. If she's got a weapon in front, then that's my preferred position because it's more predictable. You don't want to wait. You want to seize the initiative and attack first. Here's how you do that. Go ahead and hold your weapon up solid, please. You want to use quick C-shaped movements to move into range because that keeps her weapon offline long enough for me to get into range. Most likely she's going to be backing up as I'm advancing into range, but just keep on with those C movements until you're in range to strike her. Or strike your opponent, I should say. One thing you don't want to do, hold your weapon up, please. One thing you don't want to do is just put constant pressure, because if you put constant pressure, go ahead and do a circular strike. No, over your head. Then that means that the opponent can use that pressure against you. Trade me weapons and we'll demonstrate that better. Move into range using constant pressure. So if she uses constant pressure, then I can use that against her. So that's why you want to do the quick C-shaped movements instead of constant pressure. So if the opponent with the longer weapon is in a high guard or even a low guard, then that's a little bit harder because it's less predictable. So I know that if I try to move into range, she's going to attack me as soon as I'm in range. So a few things you want to do is make sure that you are prepared to block their first shot. So staying in a middle guard, ready to do a A-frame block is a good idea. Because then if I move into range and she attacks, then I've got that line of attack covered. Also be prepared for your opponent to backpedal to try to keep you at long range and not let you get into close range. I need more personal experience fighting against a longer weapon before I can add additional advice. Next thing, what to do if you are fighting a great weapon opponent with a shorter weapon. So if I had the 6'1", the 6-foot weapon, and Fiona had the short weapon, then what do I do? This honestly doesn't come up for me very much because, like I said earlier, I either want to use a similar size weapon or a shorter weapon. So if I'm the one with the longer weapon, then most likely I would go with high guard because that's what I don't like facing. So I would try to use that against my opponent. But again, I don't have a lot of personal experience with that, so I would need more experience there. I wouldn't want to go in with middle guard because then she could use those quick C-shaped movements to control my weapon as she moves into range. Next thing I want to talk about is binding. So binding basically means when our weapons are touching. In medieval longsword manuals and stuff, they talk about a lot of stuff, a lot of techniques to use from the bind. Rattan weapons don't bind this way that metal weapons do. Number one, they slide more. Number two, they bounce more. But despite those two big differences, you can still use a lot of different techniques from the bind. So let's go over those. Basically, you want to meet strength with weakness and weakness with strength. So what does that mean? If the opponent is weak in the bind, meaning that our weapons are touching, but Fiona's not pushing at all, then I want to meet her weakness with strength by pushing through her guard. All right, so a few things you can do. Number one is a driving thrust. So put your weapon more centered. There you go. So from here, try a driving thrust, which we went over in a previous video. As I step forward, I want to push my arms out a little bit. I'm not pushing straight forward, I'm pushing out to the left a little bit, and also driving the thrust with my body instead of with my arms alone, because that way I can push through her guard right into her face. The other option, go ahead and put your weapon out again. Keep your tip like pointed at me. There you go, that's perfect. From here, so if she's weak, if if I can feel that she's not pushing against me. So the first option was the driving thrust. Second option is just to push her weapon down like this, and then do the lever back edge offside head. So if the opponent is strong in the bind, meaning that they're putting pressure, so go ahead and put a lot of pressure on my weapon, then you want to meet her strength with weakness. So I pull away. So a few things you can do. Pull away to strike. If she pushes and I pull away, I can do like a circular strike, or go ahead and do it again. Or I could hit that arm that's now exposed, or do it again. Or the last one is move around into a reverse zwerchau. So those are some options you can use if the opponent is pushing on your weapon really hard. And going back to what we discussed about earlier, fighting against a opponent with a longer weapon. So that's why I want to use the quick C-shaped movements instead of solid pressure, because if I use solid pressure, then she can use that against me. One last thing to remember about the binding is if the opponent is strong in the bind and I let them push my weapon, I want to step toward that direction, because that's going to give them less time and it's going to be harder for them to recover and hit me again while I'm hitting them. Next thing I want to discuss is close range stuff. So just like with the versus Sword and Shield, one of the best close in shots is that back edge onside head or the zwerchau. Because I can do that at really close range really easily. The other option is the reverse zwerchau. I'm going to turn my body a little bit. So I'm in close range with my opponent. I step this way in order to hit them there. I want to make sure I'm clearing their weapon as I move to the offside, because if I don't clear their weapon, then they can just hit me in the back. Another option, if we're in close range, is again that counter cut to back edge offside head, the lever back edge offside head. Another thing you can try is manipulating their body or weapon. So if we're at close range, I can manipulate her arm or body in order to create an opening. I'm personally not very good at that. I'm still learning that. But Duke Tamiki does a really good video demonstrating that. And so I'll link that video in the video description. Last thing I want to discuss is when I watch Greatsword versus Greatsword fights, either on YouTube or in person, a lot of times what I see is they'll end up at super close range with their weapons held high. So they'll end up at really like this. And what they'll usually try is they'll try pushing up and then going down into the opponent's like gut or hips. And while that will sometimes work, it's really inefficient. A much better option is if I'm super close range with my opponent, just doing a zwerchau. Like, I can add a small half step, but honestly I don't need to. I can just do a zwerchau right from there, and it's super easy. So go ahead and come with her again. So if we're up close like this, it's really easy for me to just hit her just like that. I don't have to do anything fancy. Stepping this direction will help, but I don't need to. I can just right into a zwerchau.
And I can't block it.
She really doesn't have any good options to block it, yeah. Switching hands. I've said it in previous videos, but I'm going to say it again. When I'm practicing on the Pel, I always use both hands. I practice every single shot with both left and right hand leads. When I'm facing a great weapon opponent, I will usually use the same lead hand as them. So if my opponent is presenting with a right hand lead, then that's what I'll go with. If my opponent is presenting with a left hand lead, then that's what I go with. So the reason I do that is because I feel like it makes the fight more neutral and fun for me. If we are using opposite hand leads, can you come sit to me again, please? So if we have opposite hand leads, then whoever is on top has an advantage. So if I control her weapon like this, she has no shots on me. Well, I've got all of the shots on her. And so I don't like having to kind of jockey for that favorable position, trying to get on top. Even if both fighters aren't in front, if they have like high stance or something, go ahead and put your weapon up high. It still is more awkward to fight with opposite hands than it is with the same hand, at least in my opinion. So other random thoughts. Since the great weapon opponent doesn't have a shield to defend their body, then these offside body shots open up. Now, most of the time when you're facing a great weapon opponent, this hip will be protected by this hand, assuming that they're in a middle stance. But you can still hit the body and the chest and even the arm right here. Last thing is the ghost bind. This is one of Duke Mark's techniques. It kind of has elements of both binding and circular strikes. Hold your weapon up, please. Basically, ghost bind is you move as if you're going to bind, but then just before you actually bind, you redirect to a different attack. So it gets the opponent thinking that you're going to bind with them, but then you don't. All right, so that's, I'm going to link a video to Duke Mark demonstrating that ghost bind. And that's it for this video. Last subject for today is mass combat, or big melees. And that's a huge subject, so I'm going to try to break it into 2 videos instead of 1. All right, thanks for watching, and I hope to catch you on the next video.